This is the Corroboree tree frog. It's a type of frog that is native to Australia. There's two species, the northern and the southern. And as you may guess from the very bright patterns and colors, it is poisonous and very toxic. However, this poison is different from every other known poison from vertebrates that is currently known. Every poisonous vertebrate that is known doesn't actually produce its own poison. It gets its poisons from things like poisonous plants or insects or other invertebrates that it ingests through its diet. Or from something like a symbiotic relationship with toxic bacteria, where the bacteria is the one that is producing the toxin, not the actual animal itself. That is the case with pretty much everything else from fish to frogs to the poisonous bird that I talked about a while ago. They don't actually produce their own poison. But in the case of the Corroboree frog, it is the only known vertebrate that actually makes its own pretty much from scratch. They produce their very own toxic alkaloid called pseudophrenomine, and they are the only things that do this. They basically build this alkaloid up from scratch and then secrete it from their skin to deter predators. Now, I actually could not find a whole ton about the poison itself, about how toxic it is, how it works, its cellular mechanisms, or anything like that. What I could find is it can be fatal if ingested in high enough amounts, but I couldn't find the LD50 or like how it works, any mechanisms of it about how it causes death or anything. So as of right now, there really isn't that much known about the poison as far as I can find, other than the fact that this frog is the only thing that can produce its own poison like that in its group of animals. Unfortunately, it is now classed as critically endangered due to infection by a fungus, as well as an increasing number of bushfires in Australia where it's found. There are conservation efforts. This isn't an endangered species spotlight, this is more just talking about the cool frog. But there are conservation efforts. Regardless, it is still a very cool little frog and is like absolutely fascinating that it can just do this on its own. This little guy is the Amazon milk frog. They're native to the Amazon rainforest in South America, namely countries such as Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, etc. Also, this is Emily. Everyone say hi to Emily. Emily, look at the camera. Emily, look at the camera. Okay. Ah, there she is. The Amazon milk frogs are named for the kind of sticky, whitish, milky substance that they secrete when they are in distress. It just kind of doesn't taste very good, doesn't smell very good, and is used to deter predators. It also has another name, the Mission golden-eyed tree frog, which it gets after the golden eyes that has this kind of black symbol in them that looks like a Maltese cross. They also have some quite distinct blue mouths and undertones, and they do develop a bunch of bumps and lumps on them as they age to act more as camouflage to blend in with plant matter. They are a pretty popular pet. They tend to be very easy to care for, and they're not vulnerable, and you can captive breed them very easily, so most of the time they're not wild caught as far as I'm aware. However, they do tend to be pretty social frogs, so if you have them as pets, you should have at least a couple of them, but they are pretty good and easy pets apparently. Let's talk about the axolotl's weird cryptid cousin, the olm. Now, we're all familiar with the axolotl. It's very popular, it's very cute, it's very pink. People tend to love them. What people don't tend to love is a somewhat closely related species, the olm. This is the olm, a somewhat close relative of the axolotl. Now, the olm is a type of eyeless cave salamander that's found in a bunch of limestone caves in Europe. Specifically, it's endemic to a variety of limestone cave systems found in Europe, such as in Italy, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Did I say that properly? Sure. It's an amphibian, so it's related to other salamanders as well as frogs and newts, but interestingly, it is one of, if not the only amphibian species to spend its entire life underwater. It is fully aquatic. It's also the only amphibian species that is entirely 100% cave-dwelling, so they live in caves underwater for their entire lives. They don't come out, which is why they have such a variety of weird-ass adaptations to live like that. Starting off, They do not have eyes. They are almost completely blind, and by almost, I mean they don't have image-forming eyes, but they do have eyes with photoreceptors, so they can sense changes in light, they can tell when it's light and dark, and they also tend to avoid light areas. So the eyes don't actually work as eyes, they're only photosensitive and don't actually form images. So in order to compensate for that, they have enhanced other senses such as hearing and smelling. Most amphibian species do have gills during their larval stages. You can see on the adults those kind of frilly pink things. Most of the time in most amphibians, the gills do go away. However, in some species, such as the olms and the axolotls, they do retain their structure in the adult form. So that is how they breathe. The olms do have lungs, but they're rarely, if ever, used, and only used in situations where there's incredibly low oxygen in the water, or if they do happen to get stranded out of the water on dry land. Most of the respiration is done through either the gills or cutaneous respiration through the skin, which makes them incredibly sensitive to any environmental pollutants because they absorb everything through their skin, so if there's any contaminants, they do get sick very easily from that, like many other amphibian species. They do have other interesting features, one of them being that the forelegs, so the ones in the front, have 3 toes on them, but the hind legs in the back only have 2, which, okay. Also, they are almost entirely lacking pigment. Most of them do not produce any melanin at all, so instead of producing a pink pigment to look pink, it's just a lack of pigment where you just kind of see the blood vessels and veins and stuff. However, there is a distinct population called black olms that do produce melanin and do come in a black color. However, largely they don't produce any skin pigmentation at all. They're also very good at conserving energy because there's not a lot of food sources down where they live. They are largely carnivorous, so they eat other cave-dwelling, mostly invertebrates such as crustaceans or like little fish and stuff. However, they are very good at conserving energy. Some studies have found that individual olms can live like 10 years without food, which is like nuts. There's so many weird facts about these guys. Every single thing, it just gets weirder and weirder, but they are a very cool little amphibian regardless, so yeah. Take a second to appreciate these weird-ass fucking cave salamanders. Here's another interesting evolutionary arms race between the rough-skinned newt and the common garter snake. This is the rough-skinned newt. It is a species of newt that lives very commonly all across the west coast of North America, all the way down from California, extending up through Canada to areas in Alaska. This is the common garter snake, and it is, as the name suggests, very common in a ton of areas in North America. It's found all over Canada, the States, and some areas in Mexico. And these two animals have some serious evolutionary beef. The rough-skinned newt produces a very potent toxin called tetrodotoxin, which is most commonly known for being produced by the pufferfish, as well as the blue-ringed octopus, both very toxic creatures that you don't want to mess with. It is a very nasty, toxic poison. It's really not a good time. So this newt produces a ton of it, and so it has no natural predators, except for the common garter snake, which has evolved toxin resistance to the tetrodotoxin, so it can eat these newts. However, the newts don't want to be eaten by the garter snake. That's why they evolved this toxin in the first place, to kind of avoid getting eaten. So, being eaten by the garter snakes, it gives evolutionary pressure to evolve stronger toxin that the snakes aren't resistant to. So, the snakes start eating the newts evolve a stronger toxin to poison all the snakes. However, this results in evolutionary pressure for these snakes to evolve stronger toxin resistance, so they can keep eating. I just got a notification that Duolingo commented on my Morning Doves video. Hi, Duolingo! How's it going? Big fan. I have like a 1,200 day streak on there. So, the snakes, they want to keep eating the newts, so they evolve a stronger defense against the toxin, so they can eat the newts. But, like before, the newts don't want to be eaten, so what do? They evolve even stronger toxins, which the snakes develop resistance to. So, the newts develop stronger toxins. And you'll never guess what? The snakes develop stronger resistance. This has gone on and on, back and forth, basically for as long as these two species have existed within the same area. So the result of this is a population of common garter snakes that are so ridiculously toxin avoidant, like they can ingest and survive ridiculous amounts of this very potent tetrodotoxin. And this has also resulted in a species of newt that is so stupidly overpowered toxic that it can kill several, like, it hasn't been tested how many exactly, but it can kill multiple adult humans or 25,000 mice. This is the most toxic amphibian in the entirety of North America, just because this snake has decided, evolutionarily decided that, hey, I really want to eat these, so I'm just gonna keep evolving this stupidly strong toxin resistance. So yeah, evolution is an arms race. Sometimes it can just become ridiculous and produce some way too overpowered creatures. This video was requested by Cash. She wants me to talk about frogs, so let's talk about frogs today. So, I love frogs. Very, very good choice. This is actually one I took last year, a picture at my university campus bus stop. Just a little guy, so he's very cute. Here's just some interesting things about frogs. So, frogs, as you know, have a very interesting way of catching their prey, much like chameleons do. They can actually shoot their tongue out in order to snag an insect or small fish or anything, and then very quickly retract it back into their mouth, pulling the insect with them. Now, kind of a relatively recent study that was done showed that they have really weird saliva in order to accomplish this. So the study found that most of the time the saliva in the frog is just very thin and watery, but when it's on the tongue and gets shot out of the frog's mouth and it makes contact with an insect, then it actually not fully solidifies, but it gets more like dense and it grabs onto the insect. So if the saliva gets attached to the insect, it coats it while it's thin and watery, and then it solidifies. So the insect is essentially just stuck to the saliva on the frog's tongue. Then it gets yoinked back into the frog's mouth. But since the frog doesn't really want the insect to be stuck on its tongue while trying to eat it, then the saliva goes back to being thin and watery in order to easily release the insect so it can be swallowed by the frog. This, combined with the frog's tip of the tongue being very, very soft, allows for it to just super easily mold around the insect to get maximum surface area, so to make it way harder for the insect to get away, and way easier for the frog to just pull it back into its mouth. Frogs also have a very neat mode of respiration. So frogs do have lungs. They can breathe like other, vertebrates, so reptiles, mammals, snakes, all that. They can breathe and they do have lungs. However, they have a different mechanism of breathing. They don't have ribs or a diaphragm. So in humans and other vertebrates, we have a diaphragm in our chest cavity that pulls down to expand, increasing the space, causing air to rush in. That's how we breathe. But since frogs don't have ribs or a diaphragm, they kind of collapse the bottom of their throat to increase the space and increase the pressure, allowing the air to flow in. Frogs also do cutaneous respiration, which means they breathe through their skin as well. So frogs are amphibians, meaning they live both in and out of the water. So when out of the water, breathing through lungs and the respiratory tract is more efficient because there's less moisture in the air, so the cutaneous respiration doesn't really work as well. But underwater, there's no oxygen to breathe through their lungs, so the cutaneous respiration works very well by absorbing the dissolved oxygen into the capillary beds directly under the skin. So they get very easy direct gas exchange just by absorbing everything through the water. However, this does have some side effects due to the fact that they can absorb other things, so they are rather vulnerable to things like environmental toxins and pesticides and all that. Now, I'm sure most people who are familiar with frogs are familiar with the process of metamorphosis, in which they change from these really cute little tadpoles into the full adult frog. Now, this big change is triggered by a hormone released from the thyroid gland, creatively called thyroid hormones. When this hormone is released, it triggers a cascade of events that essentially results in the tadpole's body going, hey, it seems like it's time to turn into a frog, we should probably do that. However, with an improperly functioning thyroid gland, or a improper hormone cascade or receptors in anything, that doesn't really happen. I previously made a video about juvenile hormone in insects, which essentially does the same function, and if you knock out the things responsible for shutting down juvenile hormone, you can get some really, really big larvae. And guess what? That can happen in frogs too. This was a absolutely bonkers massive tadpole found. It was in a pond in Arizona, and look at the size of this bad boy. So I'm assuming what happens is that this tadpole had a non-functional thyroid and so could not produce the thyroid hormone, so instead of fully doing metamorphosis to get into an adult frog, he just kept growing. And I mean, obviously something was working for him because he got to a massive size. Like, that is one big-ass tadpole. Finally, we gotta mention my favorite types of frogs, the poison dart frogs. So, these guys don't actually produce the poison on their own. Almost all types of poison dart frogs get their poison through their diets. So these frogs eat insects, and the insects actually don't really produce their own toxin either in some cases. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they get those from the plants that they eat. So, there's a plant. The plant doesn't want to get eaten, so it produces a toxin that would kill most things that try to eat the plant. Except a bug is like, delicious, and eats the plant, and instead of dying like normal, it intakes the poison and then uses it on its own. Because the bug doesn't want to get eaten. So it's like, oh sweet, I'm toxic now, nothing's gonna eat me. Except the frogs go, delicious. And then they eat the toxic insects that would kill most other things that eat them, and instead of dying like normal, they also just take the poison and secrete it through their skin. And then it does kind of just stop there, because they're poisonous, nothing really eats them because they have this very nice coloring that say, hey, don't eat me, I taste bad and may kill you. But the kind of important thing about poison dart frogs is just touching them will not hurt you. The poison needs to get into your bloodstream, and so in most cases it can't absorb through your skin, so you need to actually ingest the poison. So by, for some reason, licking the frog or touching the frog and then touching your eyes, mouth, nose after touching it without washing your hands, or if you touch the frog and you have an open cut, then you can get poisoned. But if you're just holding it, it's not going to hurt you unless you do something stupid with it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of frogs too, so Cass, hope you like the frog video. Green and black poison dart frogs are a rather small species of poison frog that are found in South and Central America in countries including Nicaragua, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. Like all toxic frogs, they have this very bright coloring that's basically like, hey, don't eat me, I taste bad, and also will probably kill you, so maybe just don't do that. And of course, that comes through the toxins that they secrete through their skin. Now, like all poisonous frogs, excluding the corroboree frog, which creates its own poison, these frogs get their toxins through their diet. The type of toxin varies depending on frog species and their diet. It's not 100% confirmed what exactly gives these specific poison frogs their toxins, but it is through their diet of like beetles and plants and stuff like that. And since it comes through their diet, when kept in captivity or raised in captivity, they will either not develop toxins at all if raised from birth there, or I guess hatching, or if they're kept in captivity long term, they will gradually lose their toxicity without having access to the toxic food. Now, these frogs are very popular pets. They're reportedly very chill. They just kind of hang out. They're very easy to keep, and they sometimes can live for quite a long time in captivity, so they are quite popular in frog enthusiast circles. Now, while they're not rare or endangered by any means, they are still slightly decreasing in some places in population. So many countries, including I think Canada and the United States, do have a ban on importing wild-caught frogs. That's in order to protect the remaining wild species. However, in many places you can still get captive bred ones, which are often more ethical and also from hatching don't have access to that poison, so they are a little bit safer. Here's a frog that I think everybody will like, the desert rain frog. This absolutely rotund fellow is the desert rain frog. They are native to the more desert areas of Africa in Namibia and South Africa. They are well adapted to these hot and dry places by spending most of their time buried underground when it's too hot out. And they are also mainly nocturnal, coming out during the night when, 1, it's less hot, and 2, when there's more food out, which includes insects. Now, in addition to being very globular, they're also reportedly very sticky. They secrete a substance from their skin which is very, very sticky and helps stick particles of sand to them. Now, this sticky substance reportedly helps with mating, which I mean, whatever you're into. But also, during mating, they have a very unique mating call, which is just screaming. But that scream is more close to something that a dog toy would make. Now, since these guys are so orb-shaped, it makes sense that they're not very good at hopping, so instead their preferred method of locomotion is just kind of walking. And also, apparently, their underbellies are see-through, so sometimes you can see their organs. This is the tapir frog, also known as the chocolate frog, both for quite obvious reasons. It was named after the fact that its snout kind of looks like a actual tapir, as well as the fact that it looks edible. It looks like a frog made out of chocolate. Bro straight up looks fake. It is also a relatively newly discovered species. It was first definitively scientifically discovered in 2019, however locals knew about it before, in the Amazon rainforest. Then it was officially described in 2022 and has its own scientific name and all that. It is a burrowing frog, which made it very hard to study and discover because it spends most of its time underground. And it only really was discovered and found due to its very distinctive beeping call. A very interesting and honestly unrealistic looking frog. This is the mushroom-tongued salamander. It's a type of salamander found throughout Mexico all the way down through Central America and into South America. Like many types of salamander species, these guys do not have lungs and instead breathe entirely through their skin. They're also capable of dropping their tail and having one regrowth. After the one regeneration of the tail, they can no longer regrow them. They are also poisonous, specifically to a couple snake species especially that tend to prey on salamanders. When those specific snakes are hunting these guys, they will tend to just kind of stay still, let the snake try to make contact, at which point the paralytic poison secreted through its skin will take effect and the snake can no longer move and the salamander can get away. They also have a rather unique style of hunting involving their tongue, where it can actually shoot out like frogs and chameleons are known to do, which is pretty uncommon in salamanders.